Hola, buenas tardes, konnichiwa, привет, добрый день, and hello. Welcome to the Sush Pants channel. In this video, it's going to be a little bit different because I'm going to be talking about the history and what my Corolla went through to get to this point. I had a really good comment that kind of inspired this video. Definitely put comments on my videos because I do read them and they do inspire me to do stuff. This is a 1987 Toyota Corolla FX16 GTS. It was made for the US market and it was made here in the United States at the Fremont plant. You might be wondering why I wanted to get a Corolla FX16 to begin with. It is a bit of an odd vehicle and not many people know about it. Well, for me, what happened was about 12 years ago, I lost my mom to cancer. It was pretty hard for me. One of the ways that I thought would be a good way to kind of help myself grieve was to go after a car that I had always wanted since I was a little kid. My mom's first car was a Toyota Corolla, but she had just the regular 4AC powered 4-door sedan. But when she got it, it came with a brochure for the Corolla FX16 GTS. And I remember opening up that brochure and just being absolutely smitten by it. I thought it was like the coolest car. I'd never seen anything like it. Looking at the specs of the 4AGE, dual overhead cams, and seeing how much power it made and the high rev range on it, I was just completely smitten with it. I thought it was the coolest car ever. I really, really wanted it when I was a kid, and I kind of wish my parents would have gotten that one instead of just the regular Corolla, but it wouldn't have been possible. Neither of my parents knew how to drive stick shift. It was just a pipe dream for me. So after I lost my mom, I thought this would be the perfect time to pursue that dream and a way of memorializing my mother as well. So I went on the hunt to try to find a Corolla FX16, and it was hard. They were so few and far in between. And I in particular wanted to get the one that I had my eye on, which was the FX16 GTS. The GTS came with a cool body-colored body kit, so it had some other little trick things. Mechanically wise, it was pretty much the same, but it came with like a spoiler, the side skirts, just like little things that kind of made it just that little bit more special. Found one fella that was selling one in Oregon, but he didn't want to sell it to me because he thought I wasn't serious, even though I was. But ultimately, I ended up finding one all the way in Fresno. And I remember talking to the guy, and the car in the pictures looked really rough, but the big thing for me was that it was complete. It had the side skirts, it had all the different parts that it needed to be a complete car, and I was totally okay with going through the process of restoring it. And I ended up calling him up and I asked him like, hey, are you gonna get rid of it? And he's like, honestly, he's like, I've been looking for somebody that might be able to pick it up, but apparently it was in pretty rough shape, and he had it listed for like $800 on Craigslist. He did tell me that it's not drivable. Pretty much gonna have to get a trailer to take it home because it's in really rough shape. So I ended up taking my pickup truck, I rented a U-Haul trailer, and I went on the trip to go pick up the car. Crazy thing was, like, I didn't get there until like about midnight. I pull up and the guy was like, man, he's like, I can't believe you made it, because if you weren't gonna take the car, he was gonna be taking it to the junkyard because he was just tired of people that were coming that were kind of sketchy people trying to buy the car. I ended up haggling it down and I got it for like $450. Definitely a steal at the time, but the car needed so much work. Like, I remember driving, it was pulling left, right. The shocks were blown on it, but the engine was actually in pretty good shape. Like, it pulled hard, and I was like, dang, I think this is it. I'm gonna take it. So I gave him the money, loaded up the car, took the long drive home, and I didn't get home until probably like 5:30 in the morning. And then I went to work, like an hour later, which was crazy. But I was so excited to have the car, and the fact that it was complete. It had the same color interior as my mom's car was, that kind of like navy blue. It was the white color. I loved the white with the red stripe, and I had a vision for what it would be. I knew, like, as bad as it looked, I was gonna be able to make it look much better and make it look exactly like the car I wanted. The next like 4 or 5 months after that, I went through and meticulously replaced all the maintenance wear items. So I had control arms replaced, bushings replaced. I replaced all the hoses in the car, cleaned all the fuel injectors in that 4AG engine. The car had a ton of miles on it, but the engine was still decent. The compression test came back okay. It did have a problem with fifth gear. Fifth gear was popping out like crazy. So I had the transmission rebuilt, had everything done, and then I was like, okay, I gotta tackle the body. So I went through and took everything apart, took all the body pieces, the fenders off. I went to junkyards to scour any replacement fenders because I know the fender was dented on it. The bumper was in bad shape. There was like a couple little things. I think one of the side skirts was just too damaged to be usable. And I went through and just kind of pieced it all together, took the car completely apart, got it ready for paint, had it prepped, towed it to a local paint shop. They sprayed it, I put it all back together. And meanwhile, while I was doing all that, I tackled the interior because the interior was really rough on this car. The seats were torn. They were like completely collapsed. The steering wheel was like rotted and disgusting. Just the interior was in such bad shape. I mean, it was awful. The gauge cluster was like the only thing that was still like in decent shape on it. So I went through and took the seats out. I took them to a guy that does upholstery, had him build up the foam on the seats. He couldn't find the original fabrics for the seats, but he ended up getting a very close match that like was pretty much the same exact checkered print as the original seats were. So he ended up upholstering brand new seats. I had him redo the rear seats as well, so that way they matched. And then there were some plastics on the inside that were broken, so I got replacement ones, and then I re-dyed them so that way they all matched the same color. And I had them redo the steering wheel as well, so he wrapped it in brand new leather. Same thing with the shifter. Just made it look really pretty. When I got the car back from paint, it was just a slow, methodical process of putting everything back together piece by piece. As I was putting the car back together, it was like, that was the moment when I realized like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be so special. It was turning out exactly like I wanted. The paint looked phenomenal. I did not go with the original Toyota white paint. I actually went with a Chevy paint. It's a Chevy bright white, which I kind of wanted just like the whitest white I can get on this car. That was the color choice for me. And then I got that red striping on there. I think it turned out fantastic. But the seats came out so good. The interior, when it was put back together, looked brand new on the inside. When I was putting it together, I put the Dynamat all over the car because something else I didn't want is I didn't want a bunch of squeaks and rattles everywhere. It probably added like, 50 pounds or whatever in total, like with the amount of Dynamat I put in there. But I think overall it was worth it because the interior on this car sounds solid. It's really, really quiet in there. There's really hardly any squeaks or rattles. So after I had it all put back together, suspension was still stock. I had the just regular OEM grade shocks and the springs were still kind of factory. The one thing I did change out were the sway bars because that was one thing I did not like was how leany the car was in the corner. So I put Ultra Racing sway bar in the front and I put an Adco sway bar in the rear. And between those two, it really helped a lot with the cornering, but the car was much more stiffer in the corners and wouldn't lean nearly as much. So after the car was all back together and I got everything working really well, I took it on some back roads and that was one of the first videos I made of the Corolla FX16. When I drove it, I realized like, man, this car is living up to the hype. Like from what I remember, what it would feel like to drive was exactly like it was for me in real life. And that was like one of those like crazy experiences that they always say, don't meet your heroes. In this case, like, wow, it turned out fantastic. Like I couldn't believe it. Like this car was really fun to drive, made an awesome sound. It invigorated me. It made me feel like, wow, this is such a good car. And I fell in love with it. And at that point I decided like, man, I don't want to stop. I want to see if I can make this car even better. So from that point, I was kind of like debating on which direction I was going to go. And I know one of the first things I wanted to address was the engine, because the engine was a little tired. It definitely needed a little bit more power. The 4AG Blue Top was good, but it had a lot of miles on it. And I knew that like it was going to need a refresh. And that's where I was kind of debating on either going with just refreshing the 16 valve or if I wanted to go with a 20 valve, which honestly for me, I had fantasized about that engine ever since I watched like Initial D and like seeing the potential of that engine and the fact that like it's so special. You don't see them anywhere. Obviously, you know which direction I went. I went with the 20 valve blacktop with the ITBs, and it was like the best decision I ever made. So fantastic. I ended up sourcing a 20 valve blacktop, complete engine with the C160 6-speed transmission and the wiring harness and the ECU, all from Florida, and it was like cheap by that time. I think I got the whole kit for like $1,900 for the whole thing. Engine, transmission, wiring harness, and the ECU. I thought it was a steal. Ordered it. It showed up like about 3 or 4 weeks later. It was in great shape. The engine didn't have a bunch of sludge inside of it, which was so great, but it didn't really matter to me because I know my plan was to tear the engine completely down, and I wanted to make it as new and as reliable as I possibly could. So when I got that engine, I took the transmission off, stripped it down to the bare block, and I took it to a local machine shop so it can be honed and ready for a nice refresh. I took the cylinder head to a head shop where they went cleaned up the head, got everything kind of lined up so that way everything fit right and there was the right clearances in there. I slowly and methodically reassembled the engine myself, replaced everything from the bearings to the piston rings, all new gaskets everywhere. Like I went through every single part of the engine just to try to make sure that it was reliable. That was something I wanted. I wanted to be able to just rev the pants off this car, not have to worry about anything, and just have a dependable daily car. Installing the 20 valve engine wasn't too bad. 3 of the engine motor mounts lined up pretty much exactly where you would expect it to. The only one that was a little bit tricky was the transmission mount. I had to kind of do a little bit of massaging and cutting of the mount to make it fit. But otherwise, it was actually a pretty straightforward swap. On the wiring harness side, that was way beyond me. I remember like I laid it all out in my living room, had the new wiring harness, my existing wiring harness. I kind of looked at them and I was like, am I going to be able to tackle this? I was getting ready to cut some connectors and I remember I was like, no. I'm not going to do this. This is way beyond me. And at the time I was like so green, I didn't want to tackle that kind of a challenge. So I ended up taking the wiring harnesses and I sent them to this place called Tweaked Performance. I don't think he does Corolla FX or AE2 wiring harnesses anymore, which is a shame because he did a great job. I mean, like when I got the wiring harness back, it was plug and play. Super awesome. It was just like pop, 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 plugged everything in. It worked great. Now the Corolla FX16 with a 20 valve engine was such a game changer. Let me tell you, it was phenomenal. The increase in power was unbelievable. And like the sound, oh my God, the sound was just... I gotta say, I was like pooping myself. It was so good. I couldn't believe how much it transformed the car. And something else that was rather surprising is like how good that C160 transmission is. If you're considering doing an engine swap and going to a 20 valve, get the C160. That short gearing, close ratio 6-speed just keeps that engine in the sweet spot all the time. So you're never dropping out of the power. It'll make the car feel way faster than it probably should be for the amount of power that engine makes, because like you're just always in the power band. It's fantastic. And you change gears so much, it's like nothing more satisfying than that. It's a phenomenal experience. With the extra power, like, you know, almost double the power of probably what the Corolla was making before, that's when all the other little issues started appearing. So the limitations in the suspension was very clear now. The sway bars alone were definitely not enough just to handle the power increase. Everything now was like overwhelmed. Brakes were overwhelmed by far. Steering was slow, unfortunately. Like at one point when I was doing my maintenance things, I know the steering rack, the one that it came with was in awful shape. Like there was so much play, it was like practically undrivable. So I ended up ordering a replacement steering rack, which I don't think was an actual FX16 steering rack. So the steering ratio was awful. Like it was like you turn the wheel like a whole bunch before you can actually get anything to happen in it. I knew there was some stuff that needed to be upgraded, and so along the time I got a hold of Barry at MRP in New Zealand. He made some coilover suspension for the Corolla FX16, which I put on. Totally transformed the handling on this car. It now made it rock solid, where like now it felt like the chassis can actually handle the power. For a long time I had an issue with some looseness in the front end, and that ultimately ended up being the bushings for the control arms. So I ended up getting a hold of some white line bushings that really improved the feel of the front end. They stopped a lot of that kind of weird flex feeling that I had. And then for the steering, it was something that I had to really address. A good friend of mine, Colin, he gave me some pointers on this really cool mod to do with the steering rack, where you get the steering pinion out of an MRS from Japan. I got a different steering rack from an AE, I think it's AU101, and I dropped that pinion into that steering rack, which turned it into a quick steering rack. Huge improvement over the factory setup that I was running before. And now I had a quick ratio steering that was super duper tight, and the steering feel was phenomenal still. I got to retain my power steering on the car. It really transformed the steering on the car. And meanwhile, I also reached out to Technotoy Tuning, because I got the tie rod ends. So at this point, I think I must have busted like 4 sets of tie rod ends. It was a combination of the car being so fast and also having so much grip. The factory tie rod ends were just not built for that level of force and impact. The Technotoy Tuning ones completely solved that. I've been running now with the same set for years and years, driving the pants off of this car, being super hard on it, and it's been no problem. They've been holding up phenomenally well. Steering rack is still solid as a rock. It's been working fantastic. The other thing that I addressed was stiffness in the front. Right off the bat, this car feels a little loose in the front. You can kind of feel it when you jack it up. There's a little bit of flex in the chassis. And I ended up getting some ultra racing fender braces. So it's got fender braces in the front, and it also has a 4-point brace in the bottom, which kind of ties in the different points in the car for the control arms. So that way it's all nice and stiff. After I put all the braces on, the next thing I wanted to tackle was to go after the ECU, because I felt like there might be a little bit more power to unlock there. I ended up getting a coil-on-plug conversion so I can ditch the distributor, and I went with a standalone ECU. ECU that I'm currently running in the car is a Link Atom X. It came with a patch harness that I was able to plug in. I put the conversion kit in. It was definitely a pretty tricky install. I think it was just a combination of me doing the ECU and the coil-on-plug conversion at the same time. And to top it off, my tachometer wasn't working with the new ECU, and that's just an issue with trying to get old analog gauges to work with the new gear. Some interesting stuff to make it happen. I have a whole video on that whole process. For me, it was super duper important that I wanted to keep the original look on the interior. I was not going to run an aftermarket tachometer on my dash. I thought that was going to look super ugly. We wanted to just kind of keep that old school feel inside the car, just with running a modern ECU. But the Link ECU, it works okay. It works okay. I found somebody that was able to tune it locally for me, and they did a decent job of tuning it. It ended up making pretty much about the same power as it did before. So it didn't really give me much more power, but what it did give me is an ability to expand my rev range. It's tuned to go all the way to 9 with no issues. It's tuned conservatively, so there's I think a lot still left on the table because the shop that was tuning this engine wasn't super familiar with 4AGs. In fact, like that's been a limitation for me here in California, is finding tuners that are familiar with the Link ECU and also familiar with tuning 4AGs, particularly the 20 valve, because there's so few and far in between here in California. Otherwise, I'm running factory cams. I'm running just a brand new VVT gear, no change on that end of it. The only real mod is I'm running 100mm intake trumpets. That's really the only thing that's different on the engine. But otherwise, factory header. I tried the 4-in-1 header option and it didn't really work out very well. I actually ended up losing a bunch of power running that 4-in-1. And I'd say that unless you're like drag racing your car, I would not pursue doing the 4-in-1. For cooling, I was running an aluminum radiator. It was a full size aluminum radiator. And I was kind of looking at it and like, it was taking up a lot of room in the engine bay, and I ended up switching it out to a Honda Civic radiator that did a little bit of custom fitting. It takes up a lot less space, and it's a dual core radiator, and so far it's been managing temperatures just fine. I haven't had it overheat at all, even on super hot days, even when running it hard. The only place I haven't tested it yet is taking it to a track, but honestly, so far it's been performing so well, I don't think it's gonna be an issue. The Civic radiator seems to work just fine. One aspect that I've always had a challenge with the Corolla FX16 are the factory brakes. They've been really hard to modulate. I've tried different combinations of rotors, brake pads, fluids. Ultimately, what ends up happening is that the brakes get overwhelmed. They go from trying to grip to just locking up the tires, and the braking power has always been kind of iffy. If you've seen my track day video when I was driving it, like it was really hard to get good braking, consistent performance out of it. It was hard. Like I literally tried different fluids, different setups. Nothing seemed to work, and it was always kind of like the weakest point of the car. So I ended up installing this Wilwood kit from MRP, and it's transformed the braking completely. I'm running 4-piston Wilwood calipers in the front with R32 brake discs. I ended up replacing the brake master cylinder, flushed the whole system, and like, man, the braking is so confidence inspiring. You can drive so much faster now. You can actually modulate the brakes really well. You can feel the limit. You can just gently press on the brakes and get phenomenal braking performance. It's really made the car so much more enjoyable to drive on the street. I'm sure it's going to be awesome when I take it to the track as well. It's just made braking super confidence inspiring, and it feels like a modern car. Like it's no longer an issue for me. And the last thing I changed out on this car recently was the steering wheel. I changed out the Momo steering wheel that I was running, which, man, like, it looked nice, but it was hard on my hands. Like, I don't know what it was, but like it seemed to be beating up my hands every time I drive. And I changed it out to a Watanabe Falcon steering wheel. Oh, it fits and feels so great. It really matches the period of the car, and it's just like a pleasure to hold. Right now, as the car sits, like, man, it's running really good. It has a phenomenal balance of power, handling, braking. Like it's in a good spot. Like, I really don't want to mess with it. Things that I have on the shelf that are waiting to be installed is I do have a Link Atom Monsoon ECU that I'm planning on replacing inside this car just to give myself some extra inputs, because there's some stuff that I want to rewire in it. But otherwise, like, I really don't want to mess with it too much, you know? Like, part of me wants to get like Kelford camshafts to kind of get like maybe a little bit more power. But then I worry, like, man, am I going to mess up the drivability of the car? Like, is it going to ruin the low end power? Because right now it's just like, it's great to drive. Like, it has just phenomenal power everywhere. You have like good response down low, good response up high. It's a joy to drive. I don't want to mess with it. It's just really that good. It's kind of like at a really, really sweet spot for me right now. It's comfortable, it's confidence inspiring, and it's the most fun car I've ever owned. It's really turned into exactly what I had hoped to turn it into, kind of like a ultra responsive toge monster. I've owned a lot of different cars, and this is still the most fun car that I've ever had. Like, I've had faster cars for sure. I've come to the point that I don't think faster is necessarily better. I don't know if you've had this experience, but like sometimes fast cars can be boring. I've driven some really powerful cars that, you know, have way over 500 horsepower, but like they're not that fun to drive on the street. They can actually be kind of scary and terrifying. But this car, man, it just wants you, begs you, like, hit the limiter, rev it up, like, change the gears. Like, it just takes it. And it takes it like a champ. Like, it hasn't had any issues. It's been really reliable for me. Engine is still running like a champ, has great compression, no issues. You know, that the tune that it's running is very conservative. So it's been awesome. I love this car. It's my favorite car. I can't wait to see what I'm going to do with it in the future. I will tell you the next upgrade that it really needs is it needs a limited slip differential. So right now it's running an open diff, which kind of sucks because it does make enough power that it does spin the inside wheel. And like, if you're like really hard cornering, you can light up the inside wheel like in second gear, because it, you know, if you're driving like super duper fast. But if you're driving like at normal toge speeds, it's not a problem. If you're on the hunt for a Corolla FX16, I think it's a great choice. They're still at a price point right now where you can get them for not that much money still. I would try to get the most complete one that you can with everything on it. So body kit is the most important thing. Get as much stuff and most complete model as you can. Don't try to get a rough one now, because I'll tell you, when I do my trips to the junkyards now, you don't see them at all anymore. I used to be able to collect parts left and right. I'd be able to find like 1 or 2 of them that would have all the stuff on them in junkyards. Not anymore. They're just non-existent. So they're like now actually legitimately a very, very rare car. So if you're looking for one, get the most complete one that you can, because you're probably never going to be able to find replacement parts for it, which is a drag. I think it's such a cool car. Really, honestly, like deserves a lot more love than it has gotten. It's a good car. It's a really, really fun car. Lightest 4AG powered car that Toyota made at the time. I'm happy that I got my American version of the Corolla FX16, and I happen to also have the Japanese one thanks to Masakazu, my good friend in Japan in Osaka. You know, having the FX GT and the FX16, I think I'm going to keep these cars forever. There's nothing like them. I've never driven anything like it. Like I said, the cars I've had a Lotus Elise, had a Subaru WRX STI, by the way. Do love that car. I'm probably going to get another one of those. I've had a supercharged Miata. I have a current Miata right now. Like all those cars were super fun, but none of them feel like this. Like it's just the roar of the ITBs, the responsiveness of the car, the lightweight. Like this thing is just perfection. Love this car. Thank you guys all for watching. Thank you for liking and subbing the videos. Let me know in the comments if you think I built this car right, or if you think I built it totally wrong, what things I should have changed, or just say hi. But anyways, until next time, thanks for watching. Here's something that's really special about this car. It was made the same month and year as I was, September of 1986. We were literally made at the same time.